This podcast was produced by Shaun Weston Media.
Welcome to episode 27 of the Media Will Eat Itself podcast. It's another season of interviews about how modern professional people work within modern media. In today's episode, Justin Crosby and I talk about, among many things, the effect of COVID-19 on the TV industry. Justin is founder of Boom PR and has an impressive resume of roles across a number of high-profile PR firms. We'll find out about his TellyCast podcast, what he thinks of Netflix, how we consume media, the challenges of producing a podcast, and the new opportunities that lurk around the corner post-lockdown. His advice for aspiring PR professionals borders on the unimaginable. Can you envision using an iPhone to actually make a call? Without further ado, I bring you Justin Crosby. So Justin, thanks for joining me on the podcast.
Thanks for having me on, Shaun.
So you're a PR specialist and you work specifically in the TV industry. Are you exclusively in the TV industry?
I am, yeah. I set up Boom PR about 10 years ago, and I was fascinated by lots of content creators who were basically the buying and selling of television is something that I find fascinating on a world market level. So I set up the business 10 years ago purely to be a B2B specialist within the TV industry. And it's been an amazing 10 years. It's been really interesting, a bit of a roller coaster ride as television has changed.
It's changed so much, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. The entrance of the SVODs, the likes of Netflix, Apple, Google, social media, how that's changed things, advertising industry, how that's affected commercial broadcasters. And obviously now, the last 3-4 months, the pandemic is also shaking things up massively. So it's been a very eventful 10 years.
To say the least, I imagine. Now, you're based at Elstree, the famous Elstree Film and TV studios as well, aren't you? What an office.
That's right. It's great being there. There's always a surprise when you come out the door. I remember a few months ago wandering out to get a cup of coffee and seeing a load of horse guards going past, because they film The Crown there.
Oh, the Crown, of course.
Yeah.
Can you imagine though, if you'd set up, 30 odd years ago, so probably 40 odd years ago now, and seen Indiana Jones or Superman walking by?
Or Star Wars.
Or Star Wars, indeed, yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating place, and actually, there's a whole load of new building going on there, which has been announced. They're building a couple of huge new sound stages there, and also Sky are also building a huge new studio complex just up the road from there as well. It's an interesting market. There's just a studio market in its own right within the UK, because there's a massive shortage of studio space. And that's going to be really, really interesting for the drama part of the TV industry in the next few months as production starts again, because, there's going to be a huge backlog of production and everybody looking for sound stages.
Yeah, absolutely. Does that help your business at all, being in that location, in terms of networking, meeting people that you wouldn't normally meet?
You know what? I thought it might when I moved in, and actually, but it wasn't the sole reason. Geographically, it worked, but I thought it was kind of a nice added benefit being there, and that I would bump into people, but. No, you don't. I don't tend to find there's a massive advantage of being there, other than it just being an interesting location with lots of creative people.
Now, some of your history, you were previously working with some big names as well, weren't you? In terms of Taylor Herring, MSNL. So your passage, your personal passage through PR and comms is quite exhaustive, isn't it? It's quite full.
Yeah.
Cake Group, I think, Kazoo Communications. But am I right in saying that early on, before you really found this niche in TV industry, were you around video games and that sort of thing?
That's
games
right.
Industry?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Of course, yeah. I mean, going way back, my first job in PR was a very short period of time at a company called Biss Lancaster, where I met a few friends that I still in contact with to this day, which is great. Then I've always been involved in entertainment in some way throughout my career. And it's been the one constant, really. So I would say my first proper role within PR was a company called Kazoo. And I think I was the fourth full-time employee there. I spent 4 or 5 really happy years there, and I left. There was about 30 of us.
Nice growth.
So it was, it was an explosive period of growth, really exciting. And we, at that point, there was a few different agencies that were, I suppose you'd call youth marketing or youth PR agencies, and that was Cake, Kazoo, and Slice. I think the 3 companies were at the forefront. Cake was the biggest, and Slice were a little bit bigger, and sort of Kazoo was a little bit of the upstart. But we worked with some fantastic clients and brands in those days. It was really exciting to work on the first Xbox console and lots of video games for Activision. So overseeing all of their consumer PR campaigns. And that really took me forward into working with entertainment brands on a larger scale. I left there to work at a company called Cake, where I handled the music sponsorship for Carling, when Carling was a huge sponsor within the music business. And that was great. They sponsored Reading Festival. And I had an amazing brief in the year or 2 that I was there, which was really to, here's a pot of money. Let's build up Carling's association with music and create some really interesting and credible events. And, going to see Carling-sponsored AC/DC shows, Travis, The Darkness, lots of different shows were.
You essentially had your black card. You could get behind the scenes of pretty much every top musical act. Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. It was really interesting time, and music sponsorship was still really in its infancy back then. So
very new for Carling, I imagine that link.
It was, yeah, and I think that they were moving more out of football at that point and more into music. And since then, I think you've seen O2 really, pick up the mantle as
Really
being one of the major music sponsorship brands. So that was a really interesting time. And then really when I started to get involved with TV was my time at Taylor Herring, which I spent 2 really happy years there. They've now moved a little bit away from pure TV and much more into more of the stunts and brand entertainment and taking consumer brands and making them famous. And they do a brilliant job at that.
So in terms of that link then, or staying up to date with older industries, because I find this quite difficult. I was working in food and beverages for 7 years, and you become immersed in it, don't you?
Yeah.
But I find it hard to stay connected. So then after food and beverage, I worked in financial technology for 5 or 6 years. How easy do you find it to stay up to date with your older industries, or do you just kind of have to let go? I mean, what do you know about the games industry now?
That's a very good question. I take most of my knowledge for the games industry from my son, who's a Fortnite nut now. And I tell him, I relaunched Lara Croft, and
but he doesn't care, does he?
He kind of looks at me and just complete disinterest, really. But to be honest, the TV industry keeps me pretty occupied when it comes to focusing on one business, because it's huge and it's very, very varied. Am I still up to date with the games industry? No, I'm not. But I still find it really interesting when you're coming up to a new console cycle. We're going to see 2 huge consoles again. Xbox and PlayStation launched later on this year, so that's always a really interesting time in the evolution of the games industry. Interesting players coming in with Google, and it's just another industry that's been disrupted. And there are some really interesting developments there, but I can't claim that I'm sort of really on the button with it anymore. It's I spent probably about 6 or 7 years really, really immersed in it, and that was a great time. But I sort of moved on a little bit from it.
Well, let's talk about disruption again, because we've had a lot of it lately. Let's face it. So COVID-19. Now, not long after the lockdown, you started a podcast called TellyCast. So what sparked this initiative, and why a podcast in particular?
Well, it's like everything, you have a list of things you really want to do. And when you're working in client services, you have to put the client first the vast majority of the time. And really, I'd always wanted to do a podcast because I think that the medium's really interesting. It's something that it's really flexible. You can listen to a podcast when you're doing the gardening or you're driving down the motorway, or as we all are now in lockdown, sat in the office, and you can pause it when a call comes in, or you're doing a Zoom or whatever. So I feel the medium's really flexible, and it suits itself to a more informal kind of conversation.
Thank you for endorsing all of this. This is my life.
No, and I thought, now I've got a surplus of time, really. I mean, the whole TV industry has paused pretty much in terms of the production side of it. You're seeing production. You can't make TV shows at the moment in the main. I mean, there are some shows being made, but under very strict conditions.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah.
But, one of the main issues of that is insurance at the moment. So if there's another peak of COVID and you're in the middle of a TV production, you essentially lose all the money. So the government really needs to look at that and unlock the TV industry again by underwriting those productions, because until that happens, it's too risky. I mean, you wouldn't go into hundreds of thousands of pounds of commitment by filming a TV show without knowing that, if you have to stop halfway through, you're liable. You wouldn't do that. Nobody would do that. So the whole TV industry, certainly in the UK, is pretty much on ice. It's starting to open up a little bit, little by little. Hopefully we'll see that unlocking a little bit. So it left me with a lot of time, because most of my clients are producers from right across the spectrum of television production. So natural history producers, factual producers, drama producers. And so I had a bit of time, and I realised that over the years, I've made lots of great contacts and met loads of really interesting people.
Time to give them a call.
Who are pretty senior. And the great thing about an industry like the TV industry is that many of these people are opinionated. They're not afraid of sharing their thoughts and their views and their insights. So that was it. Yeah, got on the phone, and we've had a fantastic range of guests so far. Podcast going really well. We're up to about number 11 this week with the 11th show. So and it's really great fun, and it's really odd being on the other side of the mic, Shaun.
TellyCast is a podcast, we should let the listeners know, that covers TV industry news, doesn't it? It's that niche that you're in right now.
Yeah.
Will it have the life after lockdown? Who knows what the normal will look like? But when things start approaching normal service, as the TV industry might say, will you still be running TellyCast, do you think? Or do you think
that's a good question?
The possible access to guests might be in short supply?
Well, I think, in the 10 short weeks that we've been running the show, it's certainly gained a lot of momentum. We've got listeners in over 30 countries now. And I think the feedback that I'm getting from the listeners is they really like the style. It's an hour-long show. It's really conversational. It's a news review. So we talk about the different developments in the TV industry over the past 7 days. So I asked guests to choose one or two news stories that they found interesting and why. And that could be anything over the last few weeks, from the BBC and its role in public service broadcasting and how important that's become over the last few weeks.
Yeah.
Netflix doubling its expected subscriber growth, and Disney Plus launching now from nowhere, coming to 50 million subscribers globally.
That's incredible, isn't it?
So
Yeah.
so there's been no shortage of really interesting things to talk about. Black Lives Matter, and a huge upheaval. Will it carry on after lockdown? I hope so.
I hope so too. I've become a fan, actually.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Well, Yeah, I mean, it's something that I really enjoy doing, and I think it's the same as everything. You've got to evolve it a little bit. I think it might be slightly different in approach as we go forward. What's been great, and lots of people. I'm not, I don't know the numbers, but there must be a huge burst in podcasts launching over lockdown. What's been great is that the guests, you know where they are. They're going to be at home, and everybody's schedules have opened up a little bit, and people are feeling a little bit more, happy to share their thoughts and insights at what is a pivotal time in the industry. So hopefully, we'll get to the point where we've got an engaged international listener base, which I think we've got already, and hopefully that'll take us on if we change things and adapt to how people are going to consume media going forward. Once people go back to work, maybe I won't keep it in an hour. Maybe maybe we'll pull it down to sort of 30 or 40 minutes, which, when we think people will be back on the tube or doing their usual sort of half an hour or 40-minute type commute. Well, the listeners will decide. I'll look at those subscriber and listener numbers every week, and if it starts dipping, then I'll bow out. Nobody wants to overstay their welcome.
So tell me about your personal and practical journey into podcasting. Were you tapping into new skills, or have you been learning the ropes of audio production for some time?
No, it's completely new to me. And I realized that, I'd had a MacBook Air for years, and I built the company on Mac, but, realized that I've been using about 10% of its capability, literally just email and the basics. But when she started delving into it, and actually what was really interesting was the theme tune to to TellyCast was written by a neighbour of mine called Dave Turner, and the voiceover was done by Megan Clark, who lives opposite me, and her husband Dave is a drummer. So we all came together, and I said, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, because I play bass as well. So it's like, what should we, fancy putting a tune together? And we did. So that was a kind of fun little thing on a neighborhood level to do, and we also did that remotely, and that introduced me to GarageBand, because I thought, how the hell does this thing work?
Yeah.
And once I started struggling with that, then I thought, okay, well, right, how do we record it? And I spent loads and loads of time on websites like Buzzsprout, which have been fantastic, in terms of getting the knowledge from there. I was just complete novice and learning as I was going on. And, I realized, okay, I recorded an hour's worth of content, need to edit it now. The first show took me, I think it was about 16 hours to edit, which was a bit of a disaster. I finally put it live at 5 a.m. going, I can't do this every week. I've now got a fantastic editor, a guy called Ian Chambers, who's helping me out and sort of giving me a day a week back, essentially. So, no, I've been a complete novice, learning on the job, but it's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for letting listeners, perhaps potential future clients for me, understand how hard it is to actually put a podcast together.
It really is,
I think people think any creative endeavor really is easy. I've worked in offices before and sat on the same table as designers, and I've heard people come up, can you just whap something together for me? Oh, I'll need it in 30 minutes. And the designer sat there thinking, that job would take 3 hours, 4 hours of my time. Yeah. How on earth am I? There's an underappreciation for creative endeavors sometimes, isn't there?
There is. And I think that a lot of that's also, to a certain extent, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, but fueled by these the services like people per hour. Whereas, you're an hourly, it's £20 and you can get you think you can get a fantastic designer in Hungary or somewhere to put a logo together or whatever. I mean, the reality of that experience is slightly different.
Yes.
But you're absolutely right. I think creativity is often massively overlooked and underappreciated, and I think that that applies to anything, whether it's PR or design, graphic design, sound design, anything like it's a skill that's learnt and honed over time. And once you become a practitioner of that, you have somebody who's perhaps not involved in that. Maybe they're a salesperson coming up and said, right, I want this and I want this now and I want it in this way. And it's like, it doesn't quite work like that. But yeah, it is underappreciated, and I'm really hoping that the changes that COVID-19 is bringing about will help with the appreciation of skill, because there's actually going to be certainly a lot more freelancers, as companies unfortunately are going to be shedding jobs in the creative industries and every industry. So hopefully people that are forced to go freelance will be treated with the respect that they deserve and their experience deserves.
Let's come back to something you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, and it was the likes of Netflix and Apple TV Plus and those guys, the online, the YouTube and everything. How do you think has the creative media industry has changed over the last couple of decades? And obviously those guys are involved.
Well, I think the main change has been the way that we consume. The way that TV is produced, but also the way that we consume it, and the binge element of media consumption has had obviously a massive difference. We used to have box sets when it came to VHS and all the rest of it, but it's kind of a return of that binge culture, which has had a massive effect in terms of people being able to consume what they want when they want, and that's very much how the balance has changed, rather than being essentially forced to watch a linear schedule. So enjoying a show and then ends on a cliffhanger, and then you've got 7 days to wait until the next show. I mean, actually, in many ways, I think there is something to be said for that linear schedule. For example, I mean, the one example I would give is I'm a huge fan of Better Call Saul. The way that's played out is one a week, and actually I quite enjoy that. It's always something on the linear schedule to look forward to. But equally, yeah, I think that's the main change, is that not only the way that we consume, but also producers have been able to really hone in on niche audiences and create content that works for audiences in the way that they live their lives, whether it's on mobile or whether it's on laptop or however they're consuming it. It's the methods of consumption and the type of content being honed towards that has been really interesting to see.
So from a PR perspective, how has PR changed because of these changes in how we consume?
Well, again, I mean, it's really media outlets and the way that you break a story now. You have got different options, rather than, in many ways, it's kind of similar. Print media used to be the dominant media, and the way that people used to break stories was either on a daily or a weekly basis. Now, obviously, you've not only got online media, which is by far the dominant medium within TV industry circles, but also social. And all the different aspects of social media. So I don't think it's necessarily changed in terms of the way that you advise clients and the way that you build influence for clients. I don't think there've been that many new outlets that have developed over the past 5 years or so that have been particularly influential, but it's just the news cycle have sped up a little bit, and now you can be mindful of how you break a story and when, and you can time it to the minute. So if you want to if you've got a story and that you want to influence Hollywood TV executives, there's a way to do that, and timing is important, as well as the story as well as the channel. So you can be much more strategic in terms of how you announce a story, and what's really interesting is now it's much easier to draw that line between public relations, driving stories, and also the business outcome of that, which was always a little bit woolly. But I think now with digital outlets, you can join those dots up much easier. And often it's as simple as your client telling you, I had 10 calls from really influential people in Hollywood on the back of that story that you announced last week, which then opens up new conversations with them. And that could be a huge investment. That could be a co-production on a big new drama show. So that's exciting. And that's really what keeps Boom going, as a really interesting business to lead. That satisfaction when you help clients win commissions, sell their shows, sell their businesses. And that's really why I focused on the TV industry and working on small and medium-sized clients, businesses as clients, really, because you do really get that satisfaction when you make a discernible difference to your clients' businesses through your efforts, and it's hugely satisfying.
Is there a typical day for you, or is it very changeable each day? So, in other words, what are your own day-to-day challenges as an entrepreneur, as the leader of Boom?
Well, I think this year more than any other, you've got to be flexible, and I think that in many ways, and it sounds slightly perverse, but I've actually enjoyed the change that lockdown has brought along. I think working from home has its own challenges, as we see every day with kids walking onto TV sets or interviews. But what I find really interesting is that the industry, when it stopped in February, March, I almost see that, sort of look back at that, and it's like pickled now. I see that as almost like a freeze frame, and I know that when we get rid of this dreaded virus, or we adapt to live with it, as is probably most likely, that industry is not going to be the same, and that ecosystem is not going to be the same, and it's changing, and it's going to change. That period of change is going to really accelerate once the government's job retention scheme finishes in October. So unfortunately, without wanting to be a harbinger of doom, but this is going to be a really tough winter. This winter, There's going to be a lot of redundancies. There's going to be a lot of big recognizable companies going down or completely changing the way that they do business. But that presents its own opportunities. So my job, I feel, is to look at that and think, okay, well, we need to change as well. I can't expect to work in exactly the same way coming out of this. So it's about changing the perception of the business, changing what we do, what we offer as services as well. So I think, I think everybody really has to reevaluate their business, their offer, and adapt to this new marketplace, which is it's going to be really different. It's going to be really different. I think it's accelerated lots of things that, maybe businesses that weren't doing so well. It's probably accelerated their demise. But I think it's also going to give birth to lots of new ways of doing things that's going to lead to their own opportunities and new markets. So my job is to understand what those are and be a part of that. Yeah.
So last couple of questions for you, Justin. So with that in mind, I think your last answer is going to inform this one. What do you think PR might look like as a career path for young people listening in right now who are aspiring PR specialists?
Well, I think that PR has been traditionally really, it's been a very specific job path, career path that not many people have had access to. And it's a predominantly middle-class, white-led industry in terms of, or populated by middle-class white people. And I think that it's going to change, and I really hope it does change, because I think that the PR industry is led in London, and as many other industries are. Its core is in London, although there are lots of centres of excellence and people doing fantastic jobs all over the country. I mean, I'm from Leeds, and I was delighted when Channel 4 decided to relocate their headquarters up there, and this movement of wealth out to the rest of the country, and I really want to see that continue apace. And
creative wealth.
Yeah, creative wealth, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm hoping that there's going to be new opportunities for people of all backgrounds to come into the industry, much more than there are now. And I think that there are some new skill sets that young people now can really bring to PR, which is content creation, mainly. I would imagine the sort of PRs that I'll be looking to bring into the business are people that can create and edit content, whether that's audio or video, be absolutely across all the emerging social networks, and having native knowledge about of how to work within all of those social media networks. But also, the perfect PR would also be married with somebody that, with the knowledge of email is not enough, of being able to communicate. And I think that's what I worry a little bit about the next generation of PRs being completely focused on email or WeChat or whatever instant messaging. The ability to pick up the phone and call somebody, it's a real skill, actually. Being able to communicate with people on the phone. And actually, there's a bit of an adage that I live by, that if you're maybe going to and fro with a client, that you're trying to explain your point, a certain point of strategy or a certain way that you're executing something, it's not that easy to do that on email. You need to be quite a skilled writer to be able to get your point over. And maybe email isn't the right way to do that. And I think, the old adage that I live by is, if in doubt, pick up the phone. And it can lead to, so much more, such a more productive relationship with a client or with a journalist or with anybody that you're engaging. And I think that's the slight worry, is that young people now, they look at an iPhone, it's like, what, you actually want to ring somebody on it? And that's the skill of a PR, really. It's communication. It's knowing how to communicate across all these different networks, whether it be face-to-face, whether it be on the phone, whether it be via email, or whether it be via social networks or instant messaging, and being able to develop your knowledge to a point where you know which channel to use with which client. And having that mix, I think, is going to be the ultimate PR person of this of the next generation. Will know how to use those channels and what content they need for each of those channels, and be able to produce that as well.
Fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Justin. I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge in what is a very niche creative industry that we all consume. Millions and millions of us consume it, but know very little about how it works in the background. And for me in particular, I think your TellyCast podcast is really doing that for me. So thank you again.
Thank you, Shaun. Great to spend some time with you.
That was Justin Crosby, and you can find him online on LinkedIn and Twitter. His company website is boomdialogue.com. If you've enjoyed this episode, please leave a rating on your favourite podcast platform, or simply share it with a friend or someone you know may also enjoy it. Take a look at my own website at shaunweston.co.uk for more information about me. In the meantime, stay tuned. There's more to come.